Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Ms. Skokin. We are back in Chapter 9, which is all about significance testing. This time in Section 2, we're talking about tests for population proportions. By the end of this section, we should be able to state and check what the conditions are for performing a significance test about a proportion. We should be able to go through the state plan to conclude about a population proportion, the full four-step process. We want to be able to interpret what is called the power of the test and describe what factors will affect the power of the test. And we want to also be able to describe the probability and the consequences of a type 1 and type 2 error specifically associated with population proportions and in context to each of the questions. Remember the basketball player that we were talking about in Section 1 who claimed to be an 80% free throw shooter. In a simple random sample of 50 free throws, he made only 32. That was a sample proportion p hat of 0.64, which is much lower than what he claimed. Does this provide convincing evidence against his claim? Well, we start out with our significance test by stating our hypotheses, and you may recall that our null hypothesis was p is equal to 0.80, and our alternative hypothesis was p is less than 0.80 because we think he's overstating his success rate. We always have to indicate what our variable stands for, and in this case, p stands for the actual proportion or the true proportion of free throws the shooter makes in the long run. In order for us to be able to carry out the full significance test, we need to check our conditions. The conditions that we're going to have are going to be the same as what we've seen in the past for our confidence intervals, random, and we check the problem for information about a random design of an experiment or a randomly selected subjects for a survey. We also have the independence condition, which we're going to check by that 10% rule, making sure that our sample size is not too large. And the last one is going to be our large counts or normal condition. Remember, for proportions, that's going to be our n times p and our n times 1 minus p. This time, the p that we're going to be using is going to be the one that we put into our hypothesis, our null hypothesis. Both of those count of successes and failures need to be at least 10. If we meet the normal condition, then we know that we can assume a normal distribution for the sampling distribution, a normal shape for the sampling distribution. The center is going to be mu sub p hat is equal to p, or the proportion that is used in our null hypothesis. And if we meet the 10% rule, we can use that formula for standard deviation. Again, the p that we're going to be substituting into that formula is going to be the one that we use in our hypothesis. That's going to give us a standard deviation for the sampling distribution. Carrying out the significance test means that we're going to get a sample. The sample statistic, the p hat, is going to tell us how far away we are, or, well, calculating the test statistic will actually tell us in units of standard deviation how far away our sample value is from our stated hypothesis value. That's going to allow us to either reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis. It gives us evidence. If we're very far away in our sample value from our population proportion, or in this case proportion, that's in our null hypothesis, then we know that that's evidence against the null hypothesis being true. The test statistic is going to count, once again, in standard deviations. The formula looks just like our z-score formula that we've been working with for all year. Statistic minus parameter divided by the standard deviation of the statistic. Back to our basketball player example, we know our null hypothesis value is 0.80, our sample value is 0.64, and so we're going to plug that in along with that standard deviation, the square root of p times 1 minus p over n, that we use the 10% condition to make sure that we're allowed to use in our calculations. In this case, we get a z-score, or a z-test statistic of negative 2.83. Remember, we're on that left-hand side because it was a alternative hypothesis with a less than direction, and that brings us to the negative side of the curve. So we're checking to see what is the probability associated with that z-score and we find that we have a probability of 0.0023 associated with that. That is what we're testing against our alpha. Just a reminder that we can find the p-value either from table A or from normal CDF with our lower bound and upper bound, and we can find it either with the original information from the question, or once we have the z-score, we can use it using the standard normal curve. Anyhow, if the null hypothesis is true and the player truly is an 80% success rate on his free throws in the long run, then there's only about a chance of 2 in 1,000, 0.2%, that he would make as few as 32 out of a sample size of 50 shots. In order for us to run our one sample z-tests for proportions, we're going to use our 4-step process. If you look in your notes, I did give you what looks like a template for you to be able to organize your work. In the state, we want to say what we're doing. We wish to test a claim. We want to state our significance level, alpha equals, most of the time it's going to be 0.05, and we need to explain what our parameter of interest is and what our population of interest is. Also, our null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. All of that is included in state. In plan, what will we do if conditions for inference are met? We're going to run a one sample z-test for proportion. Then we're going to check conditions specific conditions like we just talked about. The do part is going to be calculating our test statistic, our z-test statistic, and then finding the p-value. Once all of that is done in conclude, we're going to compare our p-value to our alpha, explain whether we have convincing evidence or do not have convincing evidence, and then we're going to state whether we reject or fail to reject our null hypothesis. Checking conditions, again, allows us to use the standard deviation formula if the 10% rule is met, and we can assume that the sampling distribution of the sample proportions, all of the p-hats graphed on our sampling distribution, the shape is going to be approximately normal if our normal condition is met. So when we choose a simple random sample of size n from a large population, that means we've met that 10% rule that contains an unknown proportion p of successes. We're not actually trying to estimate, but we also know that we don't know the population values most of the time. So we have a claim and we're going to test the claim. In order for us to do that, we're going to use the z-test statistic. Here's the formula. Remember to look on your formula sheet for what the test statistics look like so that you're aware and you can use the formula sheet wisely and well on your test and on your end of year exam. Then once we have that test statistic value, we're going to determine what the p-value is either using table A or using our normal CDF. And again, just like we talked about in section 1, we can have a right-hand probability, which is a greater than, a left-hand probability, which is a less than, or a two-sided probability, which is going to be that not equal to symbol. Note the format of the alternative hypothesis inequalities, and remember that the null hypothesis is always going to be an equation. We know that the probabilities that we're looking for, or the p-values, are going to be tail probabilities. And on a one-sided test, we're only looking at either the left-hand side or the right-hand side. On a two-sided test, with that not equal to symbol in our alternative hypothesis, we're going to be looking at both tail areas and basically adding them together. So again, our alternative hypothesis is going to have that not equal to symbol. And typically here, we're looking for differences that are larger than, so for instance, we may say we don't know if the proportion of left-handed people at North Broward is the same as the proportion of left-handed people in the United States, and we don't have a guess as to whether North Broward has more or less, so we just use a test, a two-sided test of is different from. Because of symmetry, we can often just multiply the one-sided test, the probability, but we typically show it as adding the two probabilities. Just a quick word about the difference and comparison between confidence intervals and significance testing. We know that confidence intervals actually give us loads more information because we are attempting to estimate the population proportion with sample data. And what we're doing is creating a range of plausible values. So we have a lot of area in the middle of values that it could be. Remember, how much area depends on the confidence level, 80%, 90%, etc. And that is counts in standard deviations. Just a quick reminder about that. When we're looking at testing a claim, we're testing only against a specific value. So that actually is a yes or no kind of question, where the confidence interval, because it gives a range of plausible values, actually gives us a lot more. Let's take a look at a specific example. If we take a simple random sample of 150 students and find that 90% of them say that they have never smoked a cigarette, we know that we've met the 10% rule with 90 successes and 60 failures in the survey question, so we can calculate our standard deviation. That means, and we've also met, by the way, our normal condition. We just are not showing it here. That allows us anyway to come up with our 95% confidence interval. And once we've got that range of plausible values, we can say we are 95% confident that the interval from 0.522 to 0.678 captures the true proportion of students at Tayons High School who would say that they have never smoked a cigarette. How does this compare to our significance test? There is a link between the confidence interval and the two-sided test. The 95% confidence interval gives us a range of possible values that we could use in a significance test. None of those would be rejected because they would be within that 95% in the center area, not in the tail area. The values outside of that confidence interval in the tail area, that 0.025 on either side, is going to be in our reject area. So a two-sided test at an alpha of 0.05 and the 95% confidence interval give the same values, the same information about the population parameter. Let's talk a little bit about type 2 errors and the power of a test. Remember that a type 2 error is when we fail to reject a null hypothesis that is actually false. We know that the null hypothesis is a specific value, and the alternative hypothesis, because it's an inequality, is actually a large range of values. The thing that we're going to do, though, is we're going to look at a specific value. The probability of making a type 2 error depends on many things, including what the value of the parameter actually is that we don't know. A high probability of a type 2 error for a specific alternative value means that the test is not sensitive enough to detect that alternative. We call this the power of the test. The power of the test against a specific alternative is the probability that we will correctly reject the null hypothesis at a specific significance level alpha. There's an excellent example in your textbook about rejecting a shipment of blemished potatoes for making potato chips. And the null hypothesis level is 8%. And our alternative hypothesis is greater than 8%. So if it's greater than 8% blemish rate out of a random sample of 500 potatoes, then we're going to reject the shipment. Now, in reality, the shipment has 11% blemished potatoes, but we don't actually know this. So we're looking at the power of the test as the probability of us correctly rejecting a false null hypothesis. Just a reminder that alpha, in this case 0.05, is our significance level, but it's also the probability of us making a type 1 error or rejecting the null hypothesis when it's actually true. Now, what if the actual probability is 11% of having a blemished potato in our shipment? Then we slide that green line, our threshold level, and the power of the test is 1 minus the probability of making the type 2 error. Beyond that, you're not going to really need to be able to calculate it. You just need to know that it is the complement of beta, the probability of making a type 2 error. So power and beta are complements of one another, with beta being the probability of a type 2 error and alpha being the probability of us making a type 1 error. Okay, in this example, we would reject our null hypothesis at an alpha of 0.05 if we had a proportion of more than 9.99% blemished potatoes. If that's what our sample has in it, we're going to correctly reject not 75% of the time. This is a lot to digest, I know, about probabilities of type 1 and type 2 errors and power. Read your textbook. See you back in class.